Hi there, it's Rick Hansen on Amazing Greats, and our guest today is a friend and a gifted songwriter and recording artist, Jesse Butterworth. We're going to hear about his career, his life, and how his life has clearly been touched by the hand of God. Take a listen as we walk through the triumphs and the challenges of Jesse Butterworth on Amazing Greats. Well, welcome to Jesse Butterworth, our guest on Amazing Greats here today, and a brief introduction to the folks that don't know who you are. You're not only a musician, but you're a songwriter, you're a recording artist. Some of the accolades that you've had: 2 number 1 Christian radio hits with a group called Daily Planet, 3 top 10 radio hits. You've been nominated for 4 Dove Awards. And you actually had Katy Perry as your backup singer or backup act before she was Katy Perry. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Written songs for like 100 or more songs for other artists to record. You're featured in People Magazine, USA Today, and The Today Show. And one of the songs that I kind of dug up and listened to for the first time and loved it, you're also the performer and author of a song called The Six String Rocketeer, which I love. That was great. So welcome, Jesse. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Your group was one of the kind of early influencers in this whole contemporary Christian realm, which has grown and expanded and become huge. A lot of it because of radio and streaming. But you were kind of at the heart of more of the beginning of all of that with this group called Daily Planet. And in fact, I saw a picture of you from that era, and you looked like you might have been 12. I'm not sure.
We were definitely children. We were straight out of college.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how old were you when that was all happening? Is that?
Yeah, we started the band in when I was a sophomore in college, and then we got signed right out of school and moved to Nashville, and we're just wide-eyed, kids. So I think I was 22 maybe at the time.
Okay. Yeah. Your first name for your band turned out not to be the ultimate name. Was it? What was the original name?
House Blend was the name. Yeah, and we were, we liked that from like coffee, and we were all coffee drinkers. And then, but what we found is that was also when sort of the coffee shop thing was really big back in the early 2000s, and so people kept thinking that we were like a really chill acoustic coffee shop band, and we were not. We were very like kind of rambunctious rock band, and so we had many disappointed clients. So we were like, we might need to change our name.
For those who are not familiar with the music from back then, this is about the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
So and your music was, and you nailed it. It was hardcore rock and roll. I mean, this was raucous stuff that was going on there. In fact, you kind of had to dig a little deeper to find the Christian roots for that music, because it just sounded like a rock and roll band up on stage or in your recordings. So how did you come up with the name Daily Planet then? How did you decide on that?
Well, I've always been a really big superhero fan. You can't see it because it's over here, but it's off camera. But I've got kind of a whole bunch of Superman and superhero stuff over here. So Daily Planet is the newspaper that Clark Kent works for. So that's how we landed on it.
Yeah. Well, you see the Lone Ranger back there in the background. So that was the prelude to the superhero era.
Right.
So that's cool. So you got together with these other guys. There's 4 of you in the band. It all happened in college. Were you college mates?
Yep. Yeah. We all met at Azusa Pacific University in Southern California, and we were actually playing the clubs in LA. And so that's where we cut our teeth. And so that's where I think we really honed the sound, because we had to figure out how to, keep people who just showed up at the club to hear music, engaged. And also, we played a lot of churches too. So we kind of had, foot in both worlds.
Listening to some of the things that I've seen online, I've dug into your background there, Jesse, so I kind of know what's going on with you. But your influences as a young person were not the hard rock bands, really. It was like you were ahead of your time, or after your time, I guess, because you talk about James Taylor and the Beatles and Elton John and Billy Joel, all of which were well before your time. And yet this rock and roll sound came out of all of that. How did that transition? Is it just because you felt that there was a need for more rock and roll, or did you love doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, the sound of the time too. But I mean, if you listen, like, especially on like what you mentioned, like Six String Rocketeer, or there's several other songs that I think we were a bit more melodic than a lot of the other bands that were happening. And if you really listen, you can hear lots of Beatles influences and, Elton John hooks and things like that on there. And I mean, that's still to this day. I mean, if I were to choose what to listen to, I still usually go back to some of those incredible albums that, those luminaries that were in the 60s and 70s. It was just such a golden era for songwriting.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. So were all the guys Christians, or
Yep.
yeah?
Yeah. Azusa Pacific University Christian College. So we all met. Yeah. I think as we were trying to kind of make our way in that scene, we were kind of trying to pick a lane of like, did we want to just do like a kind of a rock thing, or do we want to do, um, a Christian thing? And yeah, I mean, we got, discovered, if you will, in LA, and by some folks out of Nashville, and we were able to get a deal. And so we were like, well, let's go this way, see what happens. So
Yeah, maybe a bit of God's direction there, uh,
yeah, right.
throwing that in the pathway of where you were at the time. So you were raised a Christian because your parents were Christian. Your dad's a Christian guy.
Yep.
That's another story altogether. Your dad's kind of a notable himself, a speaker and author and all of that. But is so as I understand it, the true relationship that you developed with Jesus was in that college period. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the first time I think I'd really, it's like the old joke of, when you ask a kid in church, you ask a church kid, what's gray and has a furry tail and eats nuts and lives in a tree, and they say, well, I want to, I think the answer is squirrel, but I'm gonna go with Jesus Christ. So I that was like my life. I knew the right answers, and I was a church kid. I don't know that I ever really internalized it. I definitely had kind of went my own way in high school, and after my folks' divorce, and but yeah, this college was the first time that I really felt like I needed to make this my own and did not feel like I just am kind of like living somebody else's life. And so yeah, it was actually through music, and of all people, it was through James Taylor. I was sitting down and playing Fire and Rain just by myself in my dorm room. And there's that line that says, won't you look down upon me, Jesus, you got to help me make a stand. And I just kind of got a lump in my throat when I was singing that. And I just sort of stopped and was like, I think I got to deal with this. I got to figure this out. So that was really kind of the big moment that um, I shifted and felt like, okay, I'm going to go all in on this.
That's amazing. I love that story. Yeah. So James Taylor was you
Yeah.
was your transformation, if you will. So
Yeah, that's
cool.
right.
Um, so music's been the cornerstone of your career. Can you kind of tell me about your own personal journey with that? So were you the songwriter of the group, or was everybody
Yeah.
collaborated? How did that all work?
Yeah, I was a songwriter. That's something I've always loved. When I was, I mean, I've always loved singing and performing, and was part of choirs and musical theater and things like that, all throughout middle school, high school. But it was, as I mentioned before, it was when my parents divorced when I was a sophomore, and I didn't have my driver's license yet, and I would just kind of like try to figure out, how do I cope? How do I deal? And so I actually picked up a guitar and taught myself how to play guitar by listening to Beatles records and Abbey Road and, James Taylor. And, I just sit there and kind of pluck and figure it out. And, this was way, way before the internet. So, I just kind of try to find whatever music I could find and figure out what shapes I could play, et cetera.
Wow.
Um, so that was, really kind of, so I have an even deeper connection, to that music, because it would really help me kind of find my way in music. And uh, and then I started writing songs, and they were terrible. just terrible songs. And
Come
so then
on. I don't
no
know.
one will hear these songs ever. But you got to start somewhere. And so I started writing songs, and I just found that like it was fun. It was a great way of sort of self-expression and kind of processing through things. And so I started doing more of that. And then and then in college, I met those guys, and I said, well, let's start a band. And I knew nothing about, a band and kind of I just knew, bass, drums, guitar, and a singer basically. And so that's what we got. And so I was writing these songs, and again, they were like, some were actually okay, and some are just terrible. But we got better, and we honed our craft. And it's like if you ever hear a stand-up comedian talk about it, I mean, the best way you figure out how if a song works, you got to put it up in live in front of people, and you can
Yeah.
just tell if something is going to resonate, or if it resonates or not. And then either make changes, or you move on and find something else that write something else or whatever. So we're
But
doing a lot of that. And we had a lot of so we had just as many failures as we had successes, but those failures really helped us just become better musicians, songwriter, um, singer, etc.
And in the scheme of things, I mean, things happen pretty doggone fast because you were still young. Were you out of college when you got signed, or were you still in college?
Yeah, we were fresh out of college. Yep.
Okay. So that was fairly amazing. And your first album was called Hero, correct?
Hero. Yeah, that's right.
Which is again spin off from the stuff that's on your wall over there. Uh,
Yeah, that's right.
so so that was in the early 2000s. You got signed, and was your first release off of that album like a hit? Did it
Yeah.
happen?
So the first song, yeah, if you've ever seen, I mean, it's very dated now, but it's sort of a classic, is that old Tom Hanks movie, That Thing You Do, where it's
Yeah.
like the Wonders slash the Oneaters. They were, that was like basically we watched that. That was very close to our journey as far as like we got there, wide-eyed kids. We got to go in the studio with, in a real studio, and we had, some studio musicians come in and augment some of the stuff that we were doing, and this guy's coming off of playing with Garth Brooks, and he's playing, B3, and we were just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And so we were just, and we had the time of our lives. So a guy named Reggie Ham produced the album, and we just got along great with him, and we all just had a great time. So and I think you can hear it, in the music too, that we enjoyed it. But yeah, then we released that first song, and it went number one right away, which we were amazed. And suddenly we were like, okay, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna, And
Yeah.
so then
We're rock stars now, what, right?
yeah, right. And so we thought like, oh, well, let's go out and play to our, the throngs of people who are just waiting for us to go out. And turns out they weren't. So we were you have to work. You have to work to get out there and get the name out and make people connect the dots between, the song and the artist, and where you're playing and when you're playing, all that kind of stuff. So same as before, it's some successes, some failures, living out on the road, a lot, basically for 3-4 straight years, living in either a bus or a van,
Yeah.
basically A to B, and then repeat.
I think, as you mentioned, there were like three kind of hit songs off the Hero album, correct? What
Yep.
were the name of those songs?
Oh man, now you're gonna.
Wait a minute,
Let's
I
see.
have it.
Yeah, Flying Blind, Everything Revolves, I think was the other one, and then I think Six Street. Or no, I Live. I Live was the other one
Okay.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't mean to throw you off there. I was That's very cool that you met these guys. I mean, this thing happened quickly in the scheme of things. At the time, you're probably thinking this is taking forever, but it was like what you kind of call an overnight success,
Yeah. Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And then you got the nominations for the Dove Awards.
Yep.
You didn't win a Dove Award, but you got nominated for 4.
Did not. Yep. A 4-time Dove Award loser is what I like.
Yeah, and you don't get anything to hang on the wall for that.
Not really.
So that's and not only that, but you performed at the Dove Awards. Was it
Yeah.
the 34th annual Dove Awards? You guys performed,
Something like that. Yeah.
in crazy outfits that
Yeah.
was like that. I'm sure the audience was, what's going on here?
We were wearing Dumb and Dumber style suits, tuxedos. So like the big ruffle, shirts, and I was wearing this giant sort of Willy Wonka style top hat, and yeah, it was pretty funny and I ended up the way that they see it's an awards show, so they seat you in certain areas based on when you're playing in the show, and so I ended up sitting I was right next to Pat Boone, if you remember Pat Boone. And then next to
Absolutely.
him was Alice Cooper. And so we were like sitting there just hanging out and chatting. And it was very funny. And so afterwards they,
Wow.
they were like, hey, that was great, and then they just never stopped giving me a hard time about what we were wearing.
Do you still have
So
the purple top hat? Is that in
I
your?
don't, but I do have the suit jacket. I still
Okay.
have that suit jacket upstairs somewhere.
Wow. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Pat Boone because he was one of our guests on Amazing Greats at one point
Oh yeah.
and
Oh
told his
nice.
whole life story. And he's an icon. He's been around
Oh yeah.
forever. He was hanging out with Elvis and all the guys back in the day,
Sure.
and he was a great guest. And
I'm sure he mentioned me though
yeah,
on
yeah,
the
he said,
podcast.
"You know who I
Yeah,
sat
for sure.
next to at the Dove
That's right.
Awards?"
This guy looked like an idiot in a tuxedo.
So anyway, we also had Debbie Boone on as a guest. So we've had a
Nice.
couple of those musicians from the old days. And you remember
Okay,
Barry
so you'll
McGuire?
enjoy this then. Sorry.
Do you remember the name Barry McGuire from back in the
Oh, of
day?
course. Yeah. Yeah,
Well, he
sure.
was another guest. He's a solid Christian now, not at the
Oh,
time, but
nice.
he is now. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, nice. When we moved, you said Pat Boone and Debbie Boone. When we moved to Nashville, one of the things we learned is there's sort of like a Nashville studio musician speak. And one of them is when you ask for different fills from a drummer. And so the most famous fill is called Pat Boone, Debbie Boone. And so that's why whenever you say Pat Boone, Debbie Boone, that's the only thing I can think of is, all right, give me a Pat Boone, Debbie Boone right there.
it all comes full circle for sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the cool things too, one of the cool aspects of all of that was the fact that those guys are still friends. I saw your 20th anniversary online chat.
Yeah.
The same four guys that were in the original Daily Planet band.
Yep.
Looks like you're still as jovial and fun as you probably ever were 20 years later. So that was very cool to see
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. I mean,
Are any of
especially
those
two of the
guys?
guys I keep in touch with a lot. Yeah.
Are they any of those guys doing music for a living?
No. Yeah.
No.
We've
Yeah, yeah.
all, I mean, I'm still doing it, but yeah, the other guys have moved on as far as I know. Yeah.
All right. Um, okay, so you started out, and you've already mentioned one of your challenges, and that was early on. That was the challenge of your parents splitting up, and
Yep.
and you're having to deal with that at a young, tender teen age, and that must have been difficult. Uh, but there were some other challenges as well, and one happened to be a performance challenge. Uh, so the parents split was one of the problems, but the other split, the one that you,
Nice.
the other one was the actual performance split that changed your life in a lot of ways. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So during every show, I mean, we actually started doing this in college and we sort of got a lot of notoriety for it. But we started doing this thing called the 80s medley. And so we would take 20 songs from the era of the 1980s and we put them all into 5 minutes. And so we would just
Wow.
kind of go one to the next. It was just this like, super fun, like, and everybody knows the songs and sing along. And so we did this every night, and then I'd always end with sort of this David Lee Roth style splits off of the drum riser. And so we were in LA playing a show, and it was kind of a like a return to kind of hometown show from where we went to college. It was a sold out show, and I jumped off the drum risers and did the splits. And this time I just landed funny. And my right leg, I ended up fully dislocating my ankle, shattering the bone about, I think it was like 28 pieces or something crazy.
Oh my gosh.
And then yeah, I was one of those like I woke I mean I kind of blacked out and came up and my toe was pointed in the wrong direction kind of situation. And so I was like, I think the show's over. So they, they
Wow.
carted me off the stage. I got into an ambulance, and little did I know that that was going to be it. I thought it was just sort of like, all right, put me in a cast. And we were actually playing Disney World a couple of days later. And so they do this big thing called Night of Joy there. And so we were like, okay, well, so I told the guys, like, hey, get on the plane. I'll meet you guys there, you know. And little did I know that that was not at all what was going to happen. And, I had to have a few surgeries and I couldn't fly back home to Nashville
Oh man.
for weeks, because of all of the trauma and the surgeries and all of that kind of stuff. And so um, we had to cancel basically all of our tour dates after that. And I couldn't travel. I couldn't do much of anything after that. I mean, I could barely walk. So, little did we know that was the end. So we got dropped by the label. We couldn't play any shows anymore. It was just sort of like I said, it was like the Wonders that thing you do where it was like super fun and then it's done, and then it's done. And
So at that point, because you were lame and not able, the band kind of went their own ways and probably lost the record deal. I'm sure at that point. Um,
yep. Yeah, I got dropped from the record label, couldn't tour anymore. Ended up, yeah, I mean, we just ended up in this like place where literally in the kind of a split second everything changed. And
Split second, I like it.
yeah, and we did a split split second. So we had to figure out what to do. And so the guys, we all just kind of ended up spreading out and trying to figure out how to what's next for us. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I ended up moving to the Northwest. That's where my wife is from. And so I grew up in California, but yeah, we ended
Wow.
up here, and then I ended up becoming a worship pastor at a church up in outside of Seattle called Redmond, Washington, a place called Overlake Christian Church. And yeah, it was the first time I was kind of in full-time church ministry outside of doing Christian music.
And that's how you made your living at that point. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the songwriting continued during that period of time.
Yeah, I never stopped writing songs. Nashville's one of those places that, you really have to be there in order to be kind of seen and heard. If you move away, it's really hard to, continue to keep the attention of publishers and other artists, et cetera. So, but yeah, I still wrote songs and still, got placements, just not as much as, I was before.
How did you reconcile that kind of turn of events with your faith? Did you blame God for what was going on, or how did you personally deal with that spiritually?
Honestly, I think that the way that I tried to deal with it by not dealing with it and was just sort of like, it's okay. It's okay. We'll figure it out. This is, probably better. And not as much as I blame God. I think I went into sort of a shame spiral, for like, what did I do? What did I do wrong to end up here when
Mm.
we were on, a path that seemed like it was, going really well. So, it's interesting to kind of go from being in a really broken place and then into leading people spiritually, especially being young. And there's very much like I mean, authenticity is a huge value of mine. And so I always try to be authentic, but you can kind of only be so authentic when you're leading. As I think that there's a fear that you could be too authentic and end up just casting a lot of doubt in other people of like, well, gosh, if he doesn't believe it, then should I believe it too? And so yeah, I think there was a lot of like trying to find my, like what I was saying before about when I went to college was I've got to find who I am and what I believe, and then how does that play out,
Yeah.
you know, in front of people as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen pastors before who maybe overshare, like you're talking about.
Right, right,
And yeah, and it is I think in the long run it's not a benefit to the congregation to know all that stuff, right?
right.
So your career, your life at that point was a worship leader at the church,
Yep.
and in the back of your mind, were you still saying, I really liked writing, I liked recording, and was that kind of a lingering thought in your mind that something somewhere along the line I'm going to do something with my gift?
Yeah, so I actually was still writing and recording at that time, and we
Okay.
released a lot of albums, yeah, when I was there. So we did a lot of worship music albums that I was still writing, and
Oh,
yeah, so it never really stopped. I think the thing that was kind of happening in the back of my mind was, I was kind of missing the freedom that we experienced when I was in college in playing like the clubs in LA, of that there wasn't, there was never a feeling like the theological police were out there listening to your songs and trying to, they're about to give you notes on, well, you said this or you said that, or, there'd be radio stations that would give us, tell us we're not going to play this song because, you infer that, and then they go into some minutia of theology. And so, and being in a really large church and writing songs, you still, get angry letters from people and,
yeah,
whatever. And so I just thought like, man, I do miss that, just kind of the freedom of being able to go out and just play to people, play music and feel like it's really self-expression as opposed to congregational, which I still really like congregational. I think that that's a great thing. But I think if that's the only thing you do, it can start to feel a little like you're handcuffed in one lane. And so
yeah.
it's nice that, yeah, I was really wanting to kind of get out and explore the other side.
Okay, let's talk just a smidge because you have had this kind of long history in the whole Christian music genre, and Christian music is like blossomed over the last 10 years, a lot because of radio. Radio
Mhm.
stations across the country have picked up that as a format. The format has become strong, and ratings are good, and advertising is good, and fundraising is good, and all of those kinds of things, as well as streaming. Just making product available to anyone, anywhere. So I guess the question I have for you is, what are your thoughts on the evolution of contemporary Christian music? It's certainly a whole different thing going on right now than you were doing back in the early 2000s. What's
Yeah.
your overview of CCM?
Oh, man.
Now you're on
Like
the
that's
spot again.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Let's see. Here's the way I probably would answer that. The way that I would answer that is I think that it serves a lot of people out there, and that it is an incredible gift to people who don't see behind the curtain. And that's what I think I would focus on as far as like, I'm really glad that that happens. I think I saw too much behind the curtain and still have friends in the industry that I know how, it doesn't quite always match up the way that people present on stage. And so I think, again, because you just said it again. I mean, authenticity is a big part of that's a big value for me. And so I think I struggle probably because I maybe know too much, but I struggle sometimes with knowing that like, oh, that person is very popular and successful, and they're borderline terrible people. So but that's what I'm saying is it's like I think God can use anybody and anything, and that's why I think I'm so happy to know that so much of that music is a gift to people who are who are listening and really ingesting that, and that it means something to their life, and that they are hopefully getting more intimate with God because of it. It's just always going to be some kind of a dark side of something. And so, and I've been in ministry for a long time too.
So, challenge number three in your life, and you probably knew I was going to go here somewhere, and that is your health issues with your wife. So
Uh-huh.
she's challenged right now in this season of your life with some health things going on. Can you share with us that part of your story?
I was a music pastor for 7 years, and then my wife and I both felt called to start a church. And so we started a church. We planted a church in downtown Bellevue, just east of Seattle, and we genuinely started from nothing. And we kind of had a group of about 12 people, and the starting of that church was extremely, gosh, it was very tough, huge lift,
Mhm.
and we also adopted our daughter from Ethiopia, and it ended up being, it wasn't supposed to be, but because of the way the timing all ended up working out, we ended up adopting our daughter at the same time that we were launching this church. And
Oh.
so it was just a lot of stuff that was all happening at once. So yeah, we are very in it with this church. I was the lead pastor, and my wife was, I mean, if anybody knows in ministry, it's like, especially early on, your spouse ends up kind of just being everything, and so she was incredible. And but yeah, then we started noticing that she was starting to kind of feel a lot of chronic pain, and she was kind of having uh, unexpected weight gain and swelling, and we couldn't figure out what it was. And she went to several doctors and specialists here, and it was actually ended up being an old neighbor that she ran into at the grocery store. And the old neighbor, her name is Kim, she started talking about her journey. And my wife was like, "Oh my gosh, you're explaining everything of what I'm experiencing right now."
Hmm.
And she said, "Oh yeah, it's something called lipedema, and essentially what it is it's like kind of a toxic fat that sits on top of your lymphatic system, and a lot of the symptoms end up looking like cancer." And so we were very concerned for a while that she had cancer. And so anyway, nobody at that time, nobody in America was treating it. So we ended up going out to a specialist in Germany 3 different times to be treated, and yeah, and we had great results for a few years, and then COVID hit, and COVID ended up, and still, the research hasn't come back yet, so they don't know why, but COVID ended up reactivating
Hmm.
that in her body, and across, I mean, many, many other people as well. And so she kind of had to come back with a vengeance. And so, but since then, there is somebody now in Tampa, Florida, that treats this. So we don't have to go all the way to Germany. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, a year ago, she had surgery for that. And so she'll have 2 more surgeries over the next couple of years as we continue, yeah, to
And
figure this out.
is she feeling better, or is it?
She is, yeah.
Yeah.
Thankfully, she is. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely sort of good days and bad days, but for the most part, yeah, she is trending up and to the right, which we're very grateful for.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, that's we and hopefully the audience of our podcast here will be praying for her continued healing and God's
Thank you.
healing in her.
Yeah,
So that's
thank you.
sometimes at the end of your resources, and the only place to turn is to God
Yeah,
for assistance and help and guidance. So
yeah,
anyway, I don't want to not talk about your latest recording because one of the one of your favorites was the Beatles. So you
yep,
went to where the Beatles were
yep.
and recorded a new album. And tell us a little bit about that project.
I had the opportunity to go to record at Abbey Road Studios, which is obviously most famous for, like you mentioned, the Beatles recorded, 90% of their catalog there. And being in the room where it happened was just a dream come true. I mean, it was amazing. I don't know how else to explain it. You probably had this experience in your life, but when you know that you're going to go somewhere, you really are like trying to match up your material to the place you're going. And so, I mean, I wrote a lot of songs, and I just felt like, it's not good enough. It's not, that's not up to the level of where, what we want to capture there. And so, I mean, it was just one of the most magical weeks of my life. And, we got to record, and every time they bring out a microphone or an instrument or something like that, I'd play this game with the engineer, and I would say, "Who is the most famous person to, play this keyboard. And he would say, well, probably John Lennon or Paul McCartney. I was like, wait, what? Like this is, and he was like, yeah. And he's like, this is the piano they played on, this song or that song, or they roll in the piano. It's very famous piano called Mrs. Mills. And it's like the ticky-tacky piano so that you'd hear on Lady Madonna or I mean, it was all over those records. And so I'm like, thinking like, why would you let me play this? This belongs in a museum, not like, some hack out of Seattle is going to come and play it. But yeah, it was fun. I mean, they're famous for these microphones. They're pre-World War II. And they have a guy on staff that his only job is to keep these microphones functioning.
Really?
And I mean, because that's really what kind of the Abbey Road sound is part of that is these big pill microphones that they have. And so I remember saying to him, "Who's the most famous person to sing into these?" And it was right when we were about to take a tea break in London. And so he said, "Well, here, come out here." And so he took me in this hallway that was just full of pictures, and every picture was a person singing into that microphone. And it was Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Elton John, the Beatles, Amy Winehouse, Adele. I mean, it was just like this wall of fame. Stevie Wonder. I mean, it was like incredible. And again, I'm thinking like, and somehow me, so it was a kid in a candy shop. And we hired in some string players from the London Philharmonic, and they just killed it. I mean, just such professional musicians. And so it was, again, it was a dream. So the other funny part of the story, though, is when we went, they were starting to talk about, we were there, I think, for about 10 days, almost 2 weeks. And when we left, COVID was like, hey, this is becoming a thing. And then we went over there, and then by the last couple of days, it was like, y'all better get home. This is a big deal. And so we took the last flight out of London back to Seattle. And if we had missed that flight, we would have been stuck in London for who knows how long. But so we were, and it was like a zombie movie. I mean, it was crazy because it was one of those big jumbo airliner, and I think I counted 24 people on the flight. I mean, there
Wow.
was nobody, and it was creepy. And
Yeah. Were you assigned to a label when you went to do this recording, or you just did it?
yeah, everything. Yeah, I mean, I've not been signed to a label since we were signed, out of college, and so I've done everything independently, and which is nice because then you don't have other people, telling you what you can and can't do, and you can kind of explore different parts of music that maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise. But yeah, I do everything independently, and I either, raise money through patronage, Patreon type campaigns, or I just take money from performing and just set some aside and just continue to put it back into recording.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the album is great. I had a chance to, I didn't listen through every song, but I listened through several, saw the videos, I absolutely loved Our Good Old Days.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
because well, it's a great song, but also because of your acting in that
Yeah.
particular video, which was incredible.
Uh,
So that was good. Is there a favorite on the album for you? What's your favorite song?
I think my favorite song is called After It Rains, and it was a song that I wrote for my kids. And the short version is that, living in the Northwest, it rains a lot. And so there's a smell right after it first rains. It actually has a name. It's called petrichor. And so people know that smell, the smell after it rains. And so I started doing this thing with my kids when they were younger that I remember reading a study that said that smell is the sense that is the closest related to memories. And so that's why you can still go in many, many, many years later into a, middle school gym and suddenly be flooded back with memories of you being in middle school because of the smell. It still smells the same, And so
Yeah, yeah.
um, so I started doing this thing with my kids that we'd go outside, and if I would smell that petrichor scent, I would stop them and I would say, "Hey, just take a second, smell that. What does that smell like? And they would say, oh, it smells like it rained. And I said, yeah, exactly. And I said, every time you smell that, I want you to remember my dad loves me so much.
Oh man.
So we started doing this, and it kind of got to the point though where we'd walk out and we'd smell that smell, and I said, "Oh, hold on, you smell that?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, Dad, we know you love us. Can we go now?" But it was kind of drilled into them, and so, but I just thought, I'm gonna write a song about it, and just kind of, even if it's just kind of a love note that, like my oldest son is a sophomore at Washington State University, and so, even he'll text me sometimes and say it rained, and thinking of you. And so yeah, that's I think one of my favorites on that album.
All right. So what's the next step with that album? Because has it been out for a while, or it's fairly recent, right?
Yeah, it came out a couple of years ago, and so I actually have two albums that I'm working on right now that are almost done. So I got to go in March. I got to go record. Well, actually, I'll back up. Before that, I can't, maybe I want to say the April before or something like, I can't remember when it was, but I actually got to go back to Abbey Road and record another album. That's basically in the can. And so we're just kind of in mixing and, tweaking mode right now. But in this last March, I got to go to Prague in the Czech Republic and record with the Prague Symphony Orchestra. And
Wow.
so we got to do 5 songs with them. And I mean, what talk about a like wow experience was sitting, in a room with 70 world-class musicians, and all, just the air that moves around, all of the sound that's coming out. It was incredible. I mean, just another one of those mountaintop experiences.
As you tell your story, the spots where God landed, God was there and guiding you through that experience. Do you have that same feeling as I can kind of identify them from my perspective, where those are at? One of them would be the Abbey Road experience. The original experience is you as a young man getting the opportunity to sing. Where would you say God's been most present in your life?
I mean, I 100% agree with you that, God made a way for some incredible opportunities in my life to go do stuff that I would have never dreamed as a, 13-year-old kid trying to learn how to play guitar in my bedroom, listening to the Beatles and James Taylor. Never would have dreamed, that I would be in the same room that, they were making that stuff happen. And so, incredible things. But to be honest with you, I feel like the most incredible experiences that I have regularly with God are just in regular old mundane things, where I just get to pause and just be grateful, for what he's provided, and that I've got this incredible family, and that, I get to continue to do stuff that I love, and I get to be around people who are wonderful, and be grateful for the really tough times, that we persevered, and be grateful that we learned some of our best lessons through those times.
What a great way to end our conversation today. It's a very inspiring kind of thing. And thank you so much for what you do. And thank you, in all transparency, you're the worship guy at my church in Gig Harbor, Washington, Harbor Christian Center. And that's a gift every single week. So I appreciate that. And thank you so much. We'll be praying for your wife's continued healing and health. And and for your projects along the way, your musical projects, that they might find some real followers, and your continued success, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Jesse Butterworth, not an heir to the giant syrup family fortune, but he is a truly gifted artist with an amazing story. We thank you for listening to Amazing Greats today. Please help us grow our Amazing Greats family by sharing and clicking a like on this episode with your friends and family. Have a great day, and God bless.